Hi, I'm Dr. Akiba Green. I'm here talking to you about 15 harmful effects of GMO foods on your health. This presentation was done in part from research from Nathan Battalion, a naturopathic doctor. I give many thanks to him, along with research that I've done myself and my colleagues have done. I'm part of a group of doctors that are out bringing the truth about genetically modified foods and the harmful effects that it has on our health. And this 15-part video is going to go into some great research on some of the reasons why you need to avoid genetically modified or engineered foods. My practice is Lake Norman Health and Wellness. If you want more information from me, feel more than happy to visit my website at www.drakibagreen.com. That's DRAKIBAGREEN, drakibagreen.com. You can also call my office, 704-987-3993, and ask to schedule with me, Dr. Green. We're in the Charlotte Lake Norman community. Thank you very much, and enjoy the show. So, as we talk about genetically modified foods, the governments claim that they're healthy. My job today is just not to dispute those claims by the GM industry, that their modified foods are the equivalent of ordinary foods. My job is to help present research that shows why we need GM labeling in every state. Additionally, I'm going to discuss the health effects of GM foods and the deeper issues associated with how good science can cause bad problems for all of us, why the FDA needs to do a better job of regulating these products and organisms. GM health fact number 1, recorded deaths from genetically modified foods. So in 1989, dozens of Americans actually died and thousands were affected and impaired by a genetically modified version of the food supplement L-tryptophan. It caused a severe disease known as eosinophilia myalgia syndrome. The supplement was released with testing on animals, and it caused 37 deaths and 1,500 who are permanently disabled humans. Now, there was a $2 billion settlement. It was paid by the manufacturer. It was Showa Denko, which is Japan's third largest chemical company. This is one of the first cases of real trauma and death and injuries and health effects, if you will, from genetically modified foods. Now, when we talk about those effects, we're going to talk about how genetically modified foods affect food allergy reactions. This is our number 2 tip. So, in 1996, Brazil nut genes were genetically spliced with soybeans in order to add protein to them. Now, some individuals responded so severely to this nut that they went into anaphylactic shock, which can cause death. And this is a valuable lesson that was learned. Using genetic engineering, the allergens from one food can be transferred to another food that was once thought to be safe to eat. So people have allergies with Brazil nuts, and this is one of those common allergens that people talk about when they talk about nut allergies. Now, this soybean was creating the same allergies because of the Brazil nut being genetically spliced into it. Now, here's the thing. Animal and human tests confirmed the allergy danger with this nut. And it was actually removed from the market before any deaths actually occurred. Now, if animal tests alone had been done, we wouldn't see the allergy problem. It's only when human trials were done did we know that the allergy response was to the spliced Brazil nut. Had the animal tests been relied upon alone, we know a disaster would have followed. Almost all new GM foods are approved, though, after animal testing only. No human trials are ever done with a genetically modified or genetically engineered food. This is truly a recipe for disaster. According to New York University, it's estimated that 25% of Americans have adverse reactions to foods, with at least 4% or 12 million Americans having serious allergies. Those are IgE-mediated immediate allergic responses, anaphylactic shock, immediate hive breakouts, the kind of medical emergencies that we think of as a food allergy. The percentage of young children with serious food allergies is higher still. It's at 6-8% of all children under the age of 3. Now, Dr. Pungrasic, who's the head of pediatric allergies at Children's Memorial Hospital in Chicago, was quoted as saying, "I've been treating children in the field of allergy immunology for 15 years, and in recent years, I've really seen the rates of food allergies skyrocket." This has also been confirmed by the CDC on a national level. The problem is that the FDA refuses to admit there's a problem. In fact, in 1992, under intense pressure from the biotechnology or genetically modified industry, GM industry, they declared that GM foods were essentially equivalent to regular foods. We know the truth could not be farther from that statement, though. Now, the FDA's own scientists have done study after study, and the FDA heads decided that there's no need at all for allergy or safety testing of these foods to be done, even after all their scientist studies came out and said, wait a minute, we have a problem here. Now, this hands-off approach was promoted by the Bush administration, similar to what was done with the mortgage and financing, and we know how that turned out in 2008. So, when elements of nature that have never before been present in the human diet are suddenly introduced without any public safety testing or labeling notice, well, it's a recipe for disaster. The petunia flower elements in soybeans, or fish genes in tomatoes. Goodness. DNA Plant Technology Corporation in the late 1990s took fish genes and spliced them into tomatoes. You know what? Well, what happens if you have an allergy to shellfish? And you go and you buy that tomato and it's not labeled because there is no labeling of GM foods. Remember that. Well, you just had a reaction to a tomato and you have no idea why you had a reaction. It obviously risks allergic reactions among the most highly sensitive segments of our population. It's a well-known fact that, again, fish proteins happen to be among the most hyperallergenic, while tomatoes are not. The real crime isn't the lack of labeling for products like these, with hidden allergic or foreign ingredients in there and we don't even know it. The same does apply to the typical GMO that is bacterial and viral DNA artificially inserted. Now, many research studies have confirmed that there's an overall risk for GM foods. When we talk about those studies one by one, you're going to gain a picture and you're going to help realize what I've seen with my patient population, that the problems we're dealing with really go deep into our health. Now, we're talking about corn and soy. 2 research studies independently showed evidence of allergic reactions to genetically modified BT corn. BT is a pesticide, and they genetically modified the corn to put BT inside of it. Studies done by the University of Nebraska in 2000, published articles in the Journal of Immunology in 2003, and a huge study that's currently in press, the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry, all show this. Farm workers who are exposed to genetically modified BT sprays, just a spray, not in the plant, just a spray, exhibited extensive allergic reactions. So BT pesticides had their own problems when they're just sprayed on plants. Well, in 1999, York Laboratory London researchers discovered that reactions had skyrocketed more than 50% over the year before. And that corresponded with the introduction of genetically modified soy from the US. It was the first time in 17 years that soy was tested in the lab among the top 10 allergic foods. Potatoes. A study showing genetically modified potatoes expressing codfish genes were allergenic. Again, fish genes spliced into vegetables. A decade-long study of genetically modified peas was abandoned when it was discovered that they caused allergic lung damage in mice. Yet in the past year, the FDA has approved salmon genes spliced into soybeans so we can get our omega-3 fatty acids, our fish oils, while we have our fried tortilla chips and french fries and thousands of other bad foods for us that are cooked in soybean oil. You would think that they'd learn about the risk factors of allergic responses to these GM foods. It's happened time and time again. But no, they're considered safe according to the FDA. If we talk about our genetically modified health fact number 3, there's a direct cancer link to many of these genetically modified foods. We're going to talk about milk first. In 1993, the FDA approved Monsanto's genetically modified RBGH. It's a genetically altered growth hormone that could be injected into dairy cows. It's also known as RBST if you've seen that on your milk or either contains or is free of. Now, growth hormone, GH, is a protein hormone which stimulates the pituitary gland, which is really a part of your brain, the pituitary gland of cows specifically, to help them produce more milk. It increases production and it increases really profits for the dairy corporations. Scientists warned that using RBGH resulted in an increase of a chemical known as IGF-1. That increase went from 70% to over 1,000%. But the FDA still approved it. Why do we care about IGF-1? Why is it bad? It's been linked to a 2.5 to 4 times higher risk of colorectal, breast, and prostate cancer. Dr. Epstein at the University of Chicago states that this induces the malignant transformation of human breast epithelial cells. In other words, this IGF-1 causes breast cancer. And when you use RBGH, it increases IGF-1. Canadian studies confirmed the suspicion. It showed active IGF-1 absorption and development of thyroid cysts, internal organ damage in rats. Yet the FDA denied the significance of these studies. 2 award-winning journalists, Steve Wilson and Jane Aker, tried to expose these deceptions. They were actually fired by Fox News under pressure from Rupert Murdoch's supporters, including Monsanto. Forget conspiracies for a second. Even the FDA's own research shows problems with RBGH. The FDA's own studies showed spleen mass increased 40 to 46%, a sign of developing leukemia. Monsanto was completely wrong when they said that the hormone was killed by pasteurization or rendered inactive. 2 of Monsanto's own scientists did research showing only 19% of the hormone was destroyed despite boiling or pasteurizing it for 30 minutes. Normal pasteurization only boils milk for 15 seconds. So if in 30 minutes we're only killing 19% of the RBGH, How much do you think is being killed in 15 seconds? Not a lot. Now Canada, the European Union, Australia, and New Zealand have all banned RBGH. The UN's International Health Standards Board refuses to certify it as safe. Despite all this growing body of research, Monsanto continued to market this product until 2008 when it finally sold its milk hormone business. The hormones are still in a lot of products. Monsanto is no longer part of that. They sold it and they got out of that business because there was increasing pressure. But the key thing is, the policy of the FDA approving genetically modified foods not shown as truly safe started with a lady by the name of Margaret Miller. She was a former lab supervisor for Monsanto, and she became the Deputy Director of Human Safety for the FDA under Bush Sr. and his administration. As part of a large revolving door between Monsanto and Bush Sr. She was in charge of increasing the amounts of antibiotics farmers were allowed to have in their milk by a factor of 100 or 10,000%. Also, Michael Taylor became the executive assistant to the director of the FDA and deputy commissioner of policy, filling a position created in 1991 to promote the biotech industry. A law was put into effect by his doing that was designed to allow carcinogens back into our food chain. A law that went against everything that the Delaney Amendment of 1958 set out to do when it banned pesticides and food additives known to cause cancer. Well, who is Michael Taylor? He used to be Monsanto's attorney, and he's now the Deputy Commissioner of Food for the FDA. And he's a Davidson College graduate, although I don't know many neighbors who would be proud of that, especially with Davidson's farmers markets and huge organic farming community that we have just down the road from us. There are other carcinogens as well. It's not just milk, RBGH, it's not just BT corn or soy. How about GM approved products have been developed with resistance to herbicides that are commonly known carcinogens. Bromoxynil is used on cotton. Now cotton is used for cottonseed, which is a very common oil used in food. Bromoxynil is known to cause very serious birth defects and brain damage in rats. Glyphosate, POEA, the main ingredients in Roundup, Monsanto's lead product, are also known carcinogens. This is crazy because glyphosate is in a lot of foods that we are currently eating, and yet it's safe. Now, I treat a lot of autoimmune diseases in my practice, and multiple genetics and immunology researchers have shown that a number of these diseases are enhanced by foreign DNA that's not fully digested by the human stomach and intestines. So these genetically modified foods hit our body. Our body doesn't recognize the DNA. Those DNA fragments are absorbed into the bloodstream, mixes with normal DNA. The consequences genetically for this are unpredictable, and unexpected fragments have shown up in GM soy crops. So animal experiments have demonstrated how exposure to such genes can lead to inflammation, arthritis, and lymphoma, which is a malignant blood disease. GM health facts number 4. The 20th century saw a huge lowering of infectious disease rates. But you know what? There's a simultaneous raise in systemic, whole body, or immune system breakdowns. Cancer rates. Cancer is a true epidemic. It's affected by the horrible state of our environment. The true impact cannot be reviewed by experiments that look at just a couple controlled factors or isolated toxins. Scientists have shown that by combining chemical food additives into a chemical cocktail, it causes many times more toxic effects than the sum of the individual chemicals. So oftentimes chemicals that were thought to be harmless by themselves are carcinogenic in combination. An example would be 2 chemicals found in soda, ascorbic acid and sodium benzoate. Together they form something called benzene. Benzene is an immensely potent carcinogen. It's a gas. We've heard of it probably. We know that by rearranging the genetic makeup of foods, it can also contribute to cancer, and it's often non-traceable. So in 1900 in the US, cancer affected about 1 in 11 individuals. It now inflicts 1 out of every 2 males and 1 out of every 3 females in their lifetime. Cancer mortality rates rose relentlessly through the 20th century, as well to more than triple overall. In 1973, President Nixon said, "We're going to wage a war on cancer." We've lost that war. Cancer rates are higher than they ever have been, and all the money we're pouring into it is not getting us one bit closer to solving the majority of cancer problems we have, because nobody's looking at the environmental factors of our food supply and other risk factors that are leading to the cancers that we now have. Genetically modified health risk number 5, superviruses. So HIV is a form of a supervirus which develops when viruses mix together and they take genes of different viruses and retroviruses and merge into one. and it gives rise to a more deadly virus and at rates higher than previously thought. This kind of scenario applied to the most common virus used in genetic engineering, which is the cauliflower mosaic virus, or CAMV, is a great example of a horror story that we could deal with. How about that CAMV is added to Roundup Ready soy by Monsanto, BT maize or BT corn of Novartis, and GM cotton and canola. Well, CAMV is similar to hepatitis B and HIV, and it can pose immense dangers. In a Canadian study, a plant was affected with this virus. It lacked the gene needed for movement between plant cells. Okay, so you infect the virus, and you say it can't transfer. There's no gene to transfer. Within 2 weeks, the plant found what it needed on its own from neighboring genes, as shown by gene mixing. And this is important because genes that cause diseases are often crippled or engineered to be dormant to make the end product safe. Results of this study led the U.S. Department of Agriculture to hold a meeting in October 1997, but nothing was done. A French study also showed that a virus, Cucomo virus, put into a supposedly virus-resistant plant, was able to recombine RNA and spread on its own. The bottom line is we're continuing to mess with nature. I truly wonder if we're going to see a new series of superviruses develop out of the very foods we're given to eat. It's not just viruses that worry me though, antibiotics as well. So, genetically health modified risk factor number 6 is the antibiotic threat. Cows injected with RBGH have a much higher level of udder infections, up to 25% according to some studies. Farmers end up using more antibiotics that eventually end up in the dairy products we consume. Even worse, labels do not warn of this growth hormone, so that many do not realize what they are consuming. High levels of antibiotics lead to allergic reactions and weaken the effects of other antibiotics due to growth in resistant bacteria. Now, scientists have warned of this happening for years. The overuse of antibiotics can be strongly linked to hard-to-treat illnesses in people. Now, many companies are now RBGH free because of consumer demand. But at least one company, Chobani, is saying they can't afford to be RBGH free. Well, they're the richest, most successful, largest Greek yogurt company in the world. If they can't afford to do it, how can anybody else? So it sets a precedent, and it's up to consumer demand and doctors like me and people like you watching this to be able to step out and say, no, we won't accept that. Don't poison me. Most GM foods have a gene for antibiotic resistance added to them. Now, GM maize, GM corn, BT corn, plants use an ampicillin-resistant gene. In 1998, it was banned in Britain as it threatened the use of the antibiotic for human needs. Goodness. The concern is the fact that the gene can be transferred to the human food chain. The bottom line, the resistant qualities of GM bacteria can go from GM food to other bacteria in the environment and end up in the human body, which can cause significant risks of bacterial resistance, including disease-causing bacteria. GM health risk number 7, infectious diseases. 1998 also had a published journal article that showed that GM technology can be implicated in the resurgence of infectious diseases. This is occurring in many ways. Resistance to antibiotics, misuse in bioengineering, formation of new and unknown viral strains, the lowering of immunity through diets of processed and altered foods, the transference of DNA from one bacteria to another. Well, bacteria of the mouth, pharynx, and intestines can be passed from animals to humans. It truly threatens the hallmark accomplishment of the 20th century, the reduction in infectious diseases that help double our life expectancy. A study by the United Kingdom Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, and Food recommended that due to this risk, no GM food be fed to animals, since it can render our common infectious diseases untreatable via the food chain. And yet the FDA does nothing. GM health risk number 8, allergies. There's been an increase in food allergies that cannot be explained through improved diagnostic ability by doctors. I talk a lot about autoimmune diseases and food sensitivities and allergies with my patients. We talk about celiac disease with gluten sensitivity with a lot of my patients, and we're not talking too much about that with these lectures, but I want to use this one case example. There is a landmark study done by the Air Force. It compared people from 1950 to 1980 who were on a certain base, and it looked for celiac disease rates. What they saw was a tremendous increase in those rates over that 30-year period, and what they concluded was that increase in the disease, celiac disease, had nothing to do with better diagnosis. The authors concluded that it had to do with environmental factors. From the 1950s to the 1980s, we started seeing changes in our crops, changes in our food supply, changes in how our country developed foods, and it coincides with the increased risk of celiac disease. Now, the loss of biodiversity in our food supply has paralleled this increase in food sensitivities or food allergies. Frequently, the foods we eat and crave are those testing positive for bad health reactions. Now, allergic reactions are simply misguided defenses that cause the body to respond against an apparent invasion. The body thinks that there's an infection and it goes after it and attacks. Basically, cells in our body react and they produce antibodies to ward off this invasion. But this becomes our allergy. Each new food item produced contains many new potentially allergenic products. Cells in our body recognize that this new food item, like GMO food, is something that has never been seen before, and it knows to react negatively against this. Intuitively, our body's cells and overall immune system seems to reject these new foods. GM health risk number 9, birth defects. The real problem is still unknown. As we ingest these GMO products, we don't know what the long-term impact on human evolution is going to be. We know that RBGH in cows causes a rapid increase in birth defects and shorter lifespans. The number of calves born with birth defects to dairy cows has increased significantly. The real thorn in my side, though, is that no long-term studies have been conducted. While the United States does nothing without studying a topic to boredom, Canada and the EU have taken precautions and banned the use of RBGH in their dairy cows. A very recent study in 2009 by the Cornucopia Institute research showed when GM soy was fed to female rats, most of their babies died within 3 weeks, compared to a 10% death rate among the control group fed natural soy. In the U.S. population, the incidence of low birth weight babies, infertility, and infant mortality are all escalating. There is a link to these increased risks of diseases we're dealing with and what is happening to our food supply. As a result of this research, the American Academy of Environmental Medicine called on physicians to educate their patients, the medical community, and the public to avoid genetically modified foods when possible and provide educational materials concerning GM foods and health risks. They called for a moratorium on GM foods, long-term independent studies, and food labeling. They reviewed several large animal studies, and they concluded there's more than a casual association between GM foods and adverse health effects. There's causation. The strength and association and consistency between GM foods and diseases is confirmed in several animal studies. This needs to be ingrained on every representative, senator, and public official who can make policy changes about our food and health. Tell them it's not just a coincidence. There's a reason why, and the studies are there. We have to make a change, or we may not be here. Number 10, genetically modified health risk number 10 is interior toxins. Now, an interior toxin is where pesticidal foods hit our body. Now, what's a pesticidal food? It's foods that have genes that produce a toxic pesticide inside the food cells. It's bad enough to deal with pesticides that are sprayed on foods. Now these cells can make their own pesticides. The food is engineered to produce its own built-in pesticide, which produces a poison that basically splits open a bug's stomach and it kills them when the bug tries to eat the plant. Now, it represents the first time ever that cell interior toxicity is being sold for human consumption. But the key again is we don't have any long-term health impact studies. We don't know if this toxicity could transfer to other human cells. So it'll kill a bug, but could it also cause damage to us? Certain biotech companies claim that the pesticide known as BT has been approved safe and used by farmers for natural insect control. But the BT toxin that is in GM plants, these so-called interior toxins, is thousands of times more concentrated than the natural bug spray. It can't be washed off because it's inside the genes, and it has properties of allergens. We now ingest this interior plant toxin from genetically modified foods and we don't even know it. GM health risk number 11, lowered nutrition. A study in the Journal of Medical Food, 1999, showed that certain GM foods had lower levels of vital nutrients, especially phytoestrogens that protect us from heart disease and cancer. In another study of GM fava beans, a bean similar to soy, there was an increase in estrogen levels. That really becomes of concern to me because when you think about infant soy formulas, the health risk of feeding babies is now a lot more. We give our baby a soy formula and we're causing estrogen levels to increase in them. That's scary. Milk from cows with RBGH contains substantially higher levels of pus, bacteria, and fat. Monsanto's analysis of glyphosate-resistant soybean showed the GM line contained 28% more of a known anti-nutrient and allergen, Kunitz trypsin inhibitor. There's no regulated health safety testing. GM health risk number 12. The FDA only requires that firms conduct their own tests of new GM products. What? It was established in 1992 under President Bush Sr. It was referred to as a regulatory relief program to help companies survive. Really? I mean, this doesn't make sense. So the FDA makes no review of those tests at all, unless asked by the very company producing the product. So companies just present their internal company records of tests that show a product is safe. Well, do you want the fox to oversee the chicken coop? Because that's what's happening with our food supply. And it's worse than that. An FDA microbiologist, Louis Pribble, explained that companies can tailor tests to get the results that they want. Companies feel that they should not have to vouchsafe the safety of biotech foods. So let's talk about this. Monsanto is a corporation, all right? We're in a capitalist society, a free society, free market society, so they can make whatever they want and sell it to whoever they want. They say it's not up to us to make sure that what we make is safe. It's up to the FDA to ensure it's safe. Our job is just to sell it. Well, but we just talked about how the rules say that the FDA accepts whatever they tell them as safe. So the FDA is not assuming the responsibility of testing those products. They're passing the buck, and that buck is going to kill us. Philip Riegel is a biologist at the University of Minnesota. He identified that government scientists after government scientists acknowledged there was no way to assure the health safety of genetically engineered foods. Society was going to have to bear an unavoidable measure of risk. It basically points towards the fact that using genetic engineering to manipulate plants, introduce them into our food chain, is scientifically unsafe and irresponsible. We can't do that anymore. If you want more information on GMO health risks or what my office can do to help you with your health, I tell you what, I see patients all the time that come to me that have different problems. Patients that present with cancers, patients that present with thyroid disease, patients that present with fibromyalgia, burning in their hands or feet, patients that present with irritable bowel syndrome, celiac disease, Crohn's, strokes, you name it. I mean, I have a patient who had 2 strokes, a pulmonary embolism, she doesn't feel her feet, all these problems. And you know what? We can link back in her case very specifically to certain things that happened in her diet to make changes. These links are there. It's not just diet, there's a lot more to it. But visit my website, drakibagreen.com, or call my office and schedule with me and see if I can help you. Watch my series. I'm out here just to educate you. We're here to tell about the truth between what's happening and how we can get the FDA to make changes. My number is 704-987-3993. I thank you very much.